So welcome everyone to our evening on economic justice. We're hugely grateful to our speakers, whom Rhiannon will shortly be introducing. In February, we hosted an evening which focused on climate justice and care for our common home. The challenge of economic injustice, of extreme inequality, is interconnected with that of environmental destruction. Although our concentration this evening will be on economic injustice, many people are now struggling financially because of having to pay for very expensive energy. Finding sustainability in our lives is becoming more and more essential. Our speakers tonight will present us with facts, including very recent data on poverty and isolation, and how their organizations are geared to trying to alleviate these problems. Again, welcome, and we look forward to your questions, thoughts and ideas after the presentation. We now have a short prayer. Thank you. As the early Christians shared everything in common, we pray that we can find ways to redistribute our own resources to those most in need, particularly remembering our sisters and brothers across the world. We are lucky to have a National Health Service, and we give great thanks for that. Yet we pray that people will always come before profit as we work towards a just society. Holy Spirit, continue to challenge us as you breathe life into us. Help us to work towards a just and caring society where all can flourish and our planet can breathe new life. Holy Trinity, God's love and community, every day in all our living, help us to say yes to you. Amen.
Thank you, Sue. Lovely, thank you so much. Well, as we've just heard from Sue, the challenges that we face in the UK and across the world as well, they're interconnected. Inequality and environmental degradation are just two of them. And our speakers tonight, they're working to challenge this system that gives rise to economic injustice. Their organizations, as we'll hear, advocate for economic values rooted in equality and justice. They stand by those affected by financial hardship and stress, whoever they are. Our first speaker is Steph Benstead, who's a trustee and service user of Church Action on Poverty. She's an independent researcher and the author, as you can see, of Second Class Citizens, the authoritative study of the treatment of disabled people under austerity. The book, and I'm quoting, forgive me, Steph, from your own website, the book provides a history of the UK's treatment of disabled people and the creation and subsequent degradation of the welfare state. And you can see the accolade on this slide. Steph has a strong interest in what the Bible has to say about how a country should respond to poverty. Welcome, Steph. And the next slide, please. Jessica Foster, we're going to hear from her next, and she's head of church engagement at the Trussell Trust. The Trust is perhaps synonymous in most of our minds with food poverty schemes through its food banks in the UK. But tonight, we'll hear about its wider campaigns and projects, including its Essential Guarantee campaign. Jess is an ordained Anglican chaplain, deacon, and has undertaken grassroots interfaith work. And this, of course, as I mentioned just now, is an area that's close to our hearts in Root and Branch. Welcome, Jess. Slide. Thank you. Then finally, from Sian Hersey, Area Manager for Christians Against Poverty. Sian came to our launch in Bristol 2021, and we hope we'll see her again this year. And more about that event later. Sian works with churches across the Southwest, supporting those that provide debt advice and support to people living on low or uncertain incomes. And Sian's going to discuss the impact, very real impact, of the cost of living crisis and how social outreach engages with evangelism. Warm welcome, Sian. Thank you.
I am an independent researcher in disability and welfare, which basically just means I'm not affiliated with any organisation when I do most of my research. I have chronic illness myself, and I've been ill since 2011, so I depend on social security, which, as you know, social security rates being quite inadequate, that means that I am basically living in poverty. So the research that I do, I also have lived experience, which is often quite helpful for interpreting data, particularly qualitative data from people with illness or depending on social security. I'm also a trustee of Church Action on Poverty, and then because I'm on benefits, I get to be a service user as well, so I get to see it from both sides, which is great. And then, as Rhiannon said, I brought out a book, Second Class Citizens, which is about the welfare state, particularly for disabled people. And I've written another book, which I'm currently looking for a publisher, which is more from the theological angle, considering how we should worship and glorify God with all of our lives, and in particular what that means for looking for justice in society. And this is now, there we go. So Church Action on Poverty is a national ecumenical Christian social justice charity working to tackle poverty in the UK. You'll have noticed there is another organisation with CAP as its initials on our chat tonight. They are also great. So Church Action works in partnership with people in poverty. So we're very keen that we don't do things to people and we don't speak for people, but we get alongside and work with them and help them share their voices. Church Action helps me a lot in that way, which I'm very grateful for. So we're driven by the insights and experiences of people in poverty, and we have campaigns that we would do locally and nationally for policies to try to loosen poverty. And this includes programmes like Speak Truth to Power and Church on the Margins, and we've had previous programmes on hunger and things like that. And then, as well as trying to help people in poverty get their voices heard, to explain what the issues are and what some of the solutions might be, we also work directly to try to relieve poverty. So we have the local pantry scheme, which is a bit like a food bank, but there's a fee. So you pay a membership fee of maybe £2.50 or £5 a week. And then you get to go and select a basket of goods, often worth about £15 to £25 of food. And then the idea is partly you can go weekly, so it's not just the crisis support of a food bank, but something that you can go to regularly. It's a membership and there's choice, so there's a bit more dignity than the crisis support of a food bank. And then also as members, you can have a level of control over the pantry itself. And we often try to encourage people to form communities and to support one another and develop other work from within their pantries. So I was going to talk a little bit about myself and some of the experience of living in poverty. So one of the really big things for people with chronic illness is the sheer disbelief that you get from the DWP and the benefit system. I had one of my assessments for disability benefits. I thought the assessor was really nice and understanding, and then when the report came back, he'd just written in every box basically that what I had said was inconsistent with my medical condition, which was interesting because he was a paramedic, so he's trained in acute emergency medicine, and I have chronic illness, which is not acute, and disability, which isn't really an emergency. And he'd never heard of my main medical condition, and one of my most disabling conditions hadn't been diagnosed at that point, but he still felt able to just basically say that I'd lied all the way through. And that kind of feeling that you get from quite a lot of the assessors, and even sometimes when you go to an appeal, gets really traumatic after a while. And it doesn't take many such assessments to start making you really stressed every time you have to be assessed. And there's been a bit of a pause on assessments because of COVID, but I am at the point now where I'm sort of living in constant expectation that I'm going to be called for reassessment, and I might get denied the benefits that I need in order to live, and I don't know what I would do at that point. The part of the frustrating aspect is that there's also quite a lot of disbelief from doctors. Doctors are often told that if someone presents with fairly diffuse symptoms, so I have pain and fatigue and weakness and dizziness, they're basically told that someone who comes with those sorts of complaints is a hypochondriac, and you shouldn't believe them. Whereas actually someone with that sort of complaint probably has a really systemic condition like I have. So my connective tissue doesn't work properly and it affects everything in my body, which is why I have widespread symptoms, but none of them are really measurable. So I'm quite severely ill, but it's nothing that shows up on a test. So doctors can be quite disbelieving as well. And then the other place that you get this stigma and disbelief from is from just wider society. I have friends who I will hear talking about another person they know who claims to be sick or disabled, and my friends will be openly dismissive of that person in my presence. And I'm sitting there thinking, everything that you're saying about them, I could explain to you from how it feels, from my perspective, why that person's behaving like that. You know, maybe you saw them go for a walk, maybe you saw them do some gardening, maybe they bought some new flowers for their garden, and you're sitting there going, well, if they can walk, if they can garden, are they really ill? If they can buy flowers, are they actually poor? And I can talk to you about the need to maintain your mental health as well as your physical health, and that sometimes you need to do something physical like going for a walk or doing some gardening, even though it's going to have a massive physical impact on you later because you need it to maintain your mental health. But people don't see the pain, they don't see the fatigue, they don't see the nausea, they don't see the bit where I go to bed for the rest of the day and genuinely sleep all day and all night, and I can't get up to eat because I feel too sick because I went for a walk and that was, you know, too much for me physically. But people don't see that. So that's sort of the illness side, which is like a major contributor to being in poverty because you can't work. From the poverty, like the actual experience of poverty, I'm really fortunate because my dad earns good money and he can and does bail me out. So before I became really ill and before I got my own place and was claiming benefits, I lived with my parents, and whilst I lived with them, they bought me a dog so that I could have some company. So when I got my own place, I took the dog with me, but when he became older and had arthritis, I couldn't afford his painkillers, so my dad had to pay for those. And then other things happened, like my dad replaced all my kitchen units. If a fence panel falls down in my garden, he buys me a new fence panel. If at some point my boiler breaks, I'm strongly anticipating he's going to buy the new boiler because I'm not. But it creates this really interesting psychological burden because I'm constantly thinking, if I buy this treat for myself, even if it's just some cake, I'm thinking, is that fair on my dad? If I want to invite some friends over for a meal, obviously you have to pay for the food for the meal. I'm thinking, is that fair on my dad? When my dog died, and I knew that psychologically I really value having animals in the house, I knew I couldn't afford a dog, but I thought, well, I could get some pet rats because I've always wanted rats since I was a child, and I used to have a pet rat, and then my mum wouldn't let me have another one because she didn't like the tails. But I was like, if I get pet rats, can I, like, a lot of the setup costs, like the cage and so on, you can sell on again afterwards, so I can sort of justify the cost. But again, is it fair to my dad? So I often run these things by my dad before I buy anything. I check with him, and he's like, of course, like, you know, I want you to live a decent life. I want you to enjoy your life. I want it to be fulfilling. I want you to enjoy the creation that God has given, whether it's like animals or plants. And he has no problem with me buying these things, but I'm acutely aware that someone looking on could look at me and go, you're not in poverty because you have pets, or you're not in poverty because you buy things for your garden, or you can't claim to be poor if you ever buy something nice for yourself. And it's a really hard balance. Those times when I do have a bit more money, because occasionally I get paid for a project, it's really hard dealing with that sort of psychological burden of what can I buy and what shouldn't I buy, and how guilty should I feel. And those times when I don't have a project on, so I'm not being paid for anything, which is most of the time, there just isn't enough money. So you're constantly thinking as you get towards the end of each month, like literally every single meal needs to be planned and every single ingredient so that you know what you need to go and get from the shops. And you're praying that there won't be a cold snap so that you need to turn the heating on, because then your gas bill will be higher and you haven't got the money for the gas bill. to be higher, and you're praying that nothing will break, you know, like a mobility scooter, a part might break down and need replacing, or my shower broke and needed replacing. You're just praying constantly that nothing will go wrong because you haven't got the extra money for it, and that's really exhausting. So there's a lot of emotional burden, the stigma from society, the criticism from society, the burden of managing money, and then for me, the psychological burden of knowing that my dad will bail me out, but what is fair on him and what isn't. And then to finish off, I just wanted to talk a bit about responding to poverty in a Christian view. So I mentioned that I'm trying to find a publisher for a book, and one of the things that I was studying and writing about for that, I was looking at the Old Testament law and the prophets, and coming to the conclusion that when you talk about social justice, sometimes people talk about, do we try to maximize welfare? Do we try to reward good behavior? Do we try to maximize personal freedom? But they all have problems, because ironically, sometimes when you maximize welfare, you end up favoring the rich, because if you've got two people who need dialysis, you maximize welfare by giving the dialysis to the rich person because they will gain more from it. But that doesn't seem intuitively fair to be like to the poor person, your life sucks, so we're going to make it suck even more because we can't afford to treat both of you if you were in that kind of situation. And I felt like what the Old Testament was saying was actually that social justice is about prioritizing the welfare of the poor. And even when you talk about private property, from God's point of view, it's not about the right of the rich person to keep their property, it's about the right of the poor person to be protected from rich people. So the Jubilee law was a really good example of that, because if you were poor and you couldn't afford to keep your house, then you could sell it, but you could only sell it for a maximum of 50 years, and then it reverted to you. So you never lost for yourself and your future and your generations of children. You couldn't lose your right to a home, and because it's an agrarian society, therefore also your access to a job. And if you think of, for example, the Enclosure Acts that occurred in sort of the 1700s in the UK, people used to have a right to roam the common land in the UK and to forage for food from it. And then all the big landowners decided that no, they were going to privatise it and enclose it, literally put fences around it, bar out the common people. And in theory, they paid people for this. So they paid the commoners a sum of money to recompense them for no longer having access to the commons. But you can't actually do that in a way that works forever. So 200, 300 years later, we don't have that access to land that our forefathers had. So the Jubilee law was about recognising you can't sell land permanently, you can't remove people from the land permanently and consider that a fair way to be. And more recently, I've been thinking about how do we talk about people in poverty, and I think the incarnation is incredibly important. Jesus actually came and lived with us and shared our lives and experienced our lives. And that stigma that I talked about at the start is much harder to maintain when you actually live alongside someone and share in their life and talk to them about how they're feeling and why they're making the decisions they are, and support them in what they want. I think that's really important, but at the same time, we still need to take caution not to judge people, because when you're not in the same emotional situation as someone, when you're not as tired, if you're not tired, you're not cold, you're not hungry, it's a lot easier to deal with, for example, a screaming kid. But when you're cold and tired and hungry, you're much more likely to lose your temper, perhaps. And we need to have that compassion that when people are in struggling circumstances, it becomes a lot harder to make the decisions that a person in easy circumstances thinks are right, and we need to maintain that compassion. And then finally, we need to remember that actually when you look at the evidence, when it comes to helping people in poverty, what they need is support and not punishment. So the current approach is very much from the government about you punish people if they don't comply with work search. But actually, from all the people I've talked to and what all the research says, what makes a difference is when they get support, and it's often a support from a charity, often a Christian charity. That is what makes the difference. So if we actually care about poverty, we need to prioritise the poor, we need to live alongside them, and we need to be looking at supporting them and not just punishing them. And that's the end of my presentation. So thank you all for listening.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us along tonight. I'm Jessica, as I've been introduced, from Trussell Trust, and just going to talk a little bit about how churches, Christians, all of us really can work together. We use the code to end the need for food banks to mean to tackle the inequality in this country, which is worse than it's ever been since the First World War, and we are the second most unequal country in Europe after Bulgaria. And sadly, it doesn't look like it's changing at the moment. So we're really, really passionate about bringing people together to change the need for food banks, to put Trussell Trust completely out of business, and to see our food banks transformed into places of connection and hospitality, rather than perhaps the scale of the provision of food that we have to provide at the moment. So the current picture is bleak. For the last 2 or 3 years, we've been talking about ending the need for food banks, but actually we released our figures on Wednesday. And in the last year, Trussell has distributed nearly 3 million food banks, which is more than ever and double what we distributed in kind of 5 years ago. I think, as Steph has talked, people on benefits are getting an awful time, and the welfare system is not the safety net it should be, or that we agreed as a society it should be. So 40% of people claiming universal credit are regularly skipping meals. More than a third of people surveyed said they'd fallen into debt, and a quarter of people surveyed, this is people on universal credit, have been unable to work or travel to work or essential appointments because they just can't afford it. And a fifth of people don't cook hot food. We're hearing from more and more of our food banks that they're preparing kettle packs for people who can't afford to turn on the oven, and also coal packs for people who are sleeping in tents or otherwise don't have access to any kind of cooking. So it's bleak out there. As also, we're about to produce some research in the next few months about social isolation, and people who are visiting food banks have often not seen anybody to talk to for up to a month, and people are living very lonely lives, and destitution, extreme poverty really isolates people from their community, from family, from friends, because it's impossible, as Steph alluded to feel that you can spend money on things like that, on socializing or buying extra food. So it is bleak. And we know really we need system change. Our food banks are stretched beyond what they ever imagined. We're having to buy more and more food, which is not usually how it works. Usually communities support themselves with donations matching the demand. Volunteers are working harder than ever, and more people are having to come. And obviously that means there's the indignity of perhaps a queue, or less time for people to have conversation. At our food banks, we generally provide other support. We provide financial inclusion to help people maximise their income. We've been doing that for a while, and it's millions of pounds that people have accessed through that. But what we are finding now is that even when income is maximised and people are receiving everything they're entitled to, that still isn't enough to live on, to buy the essentials. Why will mine not move on? Sorry. Oh, there we go. So we are thinking a lot about what the church can do. I'm going to whiz through this because I don't want to keep for too long. But I think quite often for those of us that have maybe isolated ourselves from poverty in some way, and I'm not saying that's all of you in the room, but for those of us that are in that situation, we can say, yeah, this is wrong, I don't like it, and I generally am for some kind of change, and that can lead to doing for people, and perhaps some of those models can be a bit transactional. There's power issues in that model. I will do this for you, and generally has a bit of kind of, I will try and turn you into me. and misses the richness and the kind of connection that people might want to have, because you've got this strong kind of beneficiary donor kind of relationship rather than an equal power relationship. Sometimes organizations move on to doing with, so we try and do things together. And we think probably the most important thing that we can do, we do need to do with, we do need to do for, we do need to be with, is being with. And we kind of take that inspiration from Jesus and the incarnation, who was with. And I noticed on Steph's slides, you know, about living with, being with, moving to, literally living among, so that we can walk in each other's shoes and understand each other better. So we're really, really trying to encourage churches now to be with their community who is in crisis or facing financial hardship. And I'm an Anglican, so I can be rude about my own church. Many Anglican churches have a culture that isn't very accessible to people who are in crisis. Simple things like starting on time and staring if you walk in late can be very off-putting. The language that's perhaps used in sermons, the expectation of that everybody can do the same things, that everyone can read or write, the expectation that people can give financially, all those kind of things are very off-putting, we think, for people facing financial hardship. So we're working with a group of people who are expert by experience to think how churches can become places where people can belong without barriers and have full access and full agency as part of a church community. We've been looking at what kind of church might help end the need for food banks, and I don't want to read this out, but those are kind of some of the ideas we've come from. Churches where they seek to learn from the experience of people who are experiencing poverty. So again, whose voices are heard in church, who maybe gives a homily, who leads intercessions, who do we listen to? Do we choose to listen to people who have a certain kind of education, or do we choose to listen to people who have a certain kind of experience? Engaging in issues of justice. Our food banks wouldn't survive without churches' support, and we're hugely grateful for volunteers, donations, hosting that our churches do. But we really believe that the churches need to get involved in saying that this isn't right. It can't continue to fill a bigger and bigger gap. 3 million food parcels is not what we're planning. We're not pleased by this. We're horrified, and we want churches to say that there must be system change. There must be enough. We want to see churches partnering outside the church. You know, the Missio Dei idea that God is active outside the church, and let's find what God is doing and join in, rather than always starting our own things and trying to kind of do everything ourselves. There's so many amazing organizations. Let's join in, let's get involved, let's create vibrant communities where people can work alongside each other, doing things together. Donating, and then this sort of changing minds thing we talk about. So that's disseminating public information, educating and engaging around poverty, challenging those horrible stereotypes, the things that are said that are so damaging, and perpetuate horrible injustice. And connecting, we're really interested as well how churches can connect worship, teaching and sacraments with poverty and justice. So any ideas on that, we'd love to hear from you. We're thinking about that too at the moment. We're using Micah 6:8, what does the Lord require of you, as a model for churches. So loving kindness, doing justice, walking humbly with God. So the kindness, the donating, praying, volunteering, hosting, the doing justice, campaigning and lobbying. We have organisation and local mobilisation teams. So we have organisers in some of our food banks who try to bring people together who are using the food bank with people in power, and make local campaigns for change, hearing what needs to change in that community, and to try and get some grassroots change going in local communities. We have, as Rhiannon mentioned, an APPG, an all-party parliamentary group, exploring the need to end the need for food banks. It's now actually exploring cash first alternatives, which is something that we piloted in Leeds and went really well. It's something we're very interested in, is whether we can give people money rather than food, because actually food is a symptom. The problem is people don't have enough money to buy the essentials they need. It's not about food, it's about cash. So whether there could be a cash first solution, well, not solution, but a cash first initiative where people can get money and choose how they spend it. We also, as we've just launched a big campaign at the beginning of this month called the Essentials Guarantee. And I've got a very short animation I'd like to show you about that, and I'll talk a little. Let's start again.
Countries in the world, and yet people here in the UK are going without the essentials we all need to get by, such as food, energy and vital household goods. Life can be unpredictable, a job loss, ill health, the need to care for a sick relative, or a relationship breakdown could be just around the corner. Universal Credit should offer support to anyone in need of help, but right now, it's not providing enough to cover the cost of life's essentials. Universal Credit's basic rate is not set according to any calculation of the cost of essentials. People facing deductions to repay debts to government at unaffordable rates get even less. It doesn't have to be this way. From April 2023, Universal Credit is only £85 per week for a single adult. The UK government must make sure the basic rate of Universal Credit at least covers life's essentials, and that deductions can never pull support below that level. This means increasing the basic rate to at least £120 a week, ensuring that it is at a minimum linked to the cost of essentials. This would benefit around 9 million families, including 4 million with children. We can't always deal with what life throws at us on our own. That's why we're campaigning for a system that supports us all to afford the essentials if we face setbacks. Together we can make a difference. Join us in calling on the UK government to guarantee our essentials. We live...
So we're really passionate about this. It seems wrong and illogical that universal credit rates are just plucked out of thin air. They don't relate to anything that actually makes sense. And so what we're calling for is the government to enshrine in law that universal credit will be set by independent assessors who look at what people need to get to afford the essentials, and make sure it never falls below that level, and that people can't be, you know, when people it takes 5 weeks to get universal credit, and people have to take a loan for that time off the government, but then paying that back comes out of your universal credit. So you're way below what you need to get by. You're way below the 85 even. And then of course it's incredibly easy to be sanctioned. And there's all sorts of ways that people can lose their benefits. So we're calling on this at the moment. We did a big kind of campaign with a big giant receipt showing it doesn't add up in London. We're doing a campaign in early May to getting people to lobby MPs. So if you're interested in that, do have a look on our website and just type in Essentials Guarantee, and you'll kind of be able to follow what's going on with that. And we're hoping for a sort of mass engagement in October. So that's the justice section. And then walk humbly with God. I firmly believe really that we find God in one another, that our love of God kind of collapses into the love of our neighbor. It's one and the same. And particularly we find God, I think, when we listen to people who maybe we haven't heard from before. And so we have a commitment to be rooted, shaped and guided by our partners with lived experience. And I've only been in post a year, but one of the first things I did was pull together a panel of people with lived experience. We've had a residential, we've produced Lent resources together, where people just told stories about their favourite Bible passage. We're working on Harvest now. We are going to Greenbelt together and hosting a venue where we'll be focusing on the cost of living. Greenbelt's a Christian festival. And we're trying to we've produced 2 videos, and I need to write workshops to go with them together with my friends. And that one of those is on kind of how churches that host community spaces and food banks and pantries can make sure they're as accessible as possible and the church is no barrier to access. And the other one of those is how churches can make sure that people who are Christian and find themselves in financial crisis can be at the centre of church life and community. So they should be out very soon, probably sort of May, June. For Trust ambassadors. who are people who work with us, who will create a movement for change amongst churches. We will send you regular updates and resources to help you help your church take action. We're going to have a sort of bespoke support from the Trussell Trust team to help you reflect on a journey towards justice, kindness and community. And we're going to build a network of people on that same journey. And we're really passionate and excited about the potential for churches to really recapture, as one of my colleagues put it, that they were discussing it today in Belfast, recapture the spirit of the early church, the church that we read about in Acts 2, you know, in Pentecost. Spirit came, we hear a lot about the gifts of the Spirit, but actually, you know, this change in the community was just as much a gift of the Spirit as speaking in tongues or healing. And we're really excited about recapturing that and seeing what churches might be in the future. So this is my email. It's jessica.foster@trusselltrust.org. If there's anything you want to talk to me about offline, or if you're interested in knowing more about what we're doing, please do drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you. I am a team of one, so you will get me, but I might not respond on the same moment. But I will try and get back to you as soon as possible. And thank you for listening, and thank you for inviting us again.
Hoping I've still got at least a couple of people listening, because if you're like me, I'm like trying to look at Steph's book or find out about the Essential Guarantee and all the other things. So yeah, so I'm from Christians Against Poverty, and I'm just gonna, it's not much more of an upbeat look, I'm afraid, than what you've been hearing already this evening. It's a very similar story, and hopefully, having heard very similar things from all three of us, it will just be a slight different tack on the same issue. So basically, CAP started in 1996, and one of the main things we're known about is Debt Help. Our founder was struggling financially himself, and he set up the charity. And one of the vital ingredients he wanted to add was the local church in the partnership. And since we started with Debt Help, we also have started some other ministries along the way as well. You can see Life Skills, Job Club, and the Money Course that I'll talk through a bit as well. And through the UK network, all of these different projects, our vision is to see transformed lives, thriving churches, and an end to UK poverty. So if we go to the next slide. So these are just some of the headline stats, really. As you'd imagine, we've got 300 debt centres in the UK, and the first couple of slides are just the sort of things you'd expect, the amount of debt people have and deductions, which we were hearing a bit about from Jessica as well. The suicide figure is always one I find really difficult. And I remember when I was a debt centre manager in North Bristol, speaking to a lady, and she'd wanted to attempt suicide that morning, and she'd wanted to use her bath to complete it, but she didn't have enough water, hot water. She didn't have enough money to put on the meter to heat the water. And during all of the complexity of what was going on, she rang me, and I was able to take her to A&E. But there's just so many different things that are happening in people's lives that often the only way they can think of is the way out. So the stats that you can see on here are from our client report that we released last year. So they were based on 2021 figures. And what's shocking was that even then, 75% of our clients had arrears in council tax, water, energy, or rent. And our new report will come out in a few months for last year's. And I know that figure is not going to be any better. With the cost of living crisis and with the increases in utility bills. And I think that figure, that 36% borrowed in order to pay for essential household bills, given the other things that you've been hearing this evening, I'm sure that's not going to come as any surprise to yourselves. If we go on to the next slide. And these really just reiterate again some of the stats that you've been hearing, that the people who come to us in debt are also people using food bank, also heavily reliant on benefits. And what's really upsetting is that all of these figures have gone up since the client report the year before. So the amount of people sacrificing their meals, the amount of people going without heating and lighting and basic toiletries, all of those costs are going up. Unfortunately, what we're finding at the moment is an increase in very complicated cases with people with very difficult mental health conditions but also a phrase that I've only fairly recently been hearing about, and that's broken budgets. That's when our debt advisors, with all their expertise, put together a budget, but even if there was no debt, there isn't enough income at the start to cover all the outgoings. It goes exactly back to the essential guarantees that you've just been hearing about, with the amount of universal credit just simply not being sustainable for day-to-day life. Okay, next one. So one of the reasons I wanted to put this particular slide up was about that meaningful conversations. And again, that's another theme that you've heard tonight about, is the lack of meaningful conversations. 63% feeling that they've not really spoken to anyone in over a week. I'm not going to reiterate what you've already heard about why that would be. And so often with our clients who are in isolation and debt, we found out that a lot of the other causes of poverty, like joblessness and just generally trying to survive on a low income, were really prominent. And that's why we started what's called Life Skills and Job Club, which is on the next slide. And they are community groups that we set up together. And what we wanted to do here was have a chance for people to come alongside each other, work together as a community. I use the phrase coaching on here, but I don't think anyone in our Job Club or Life Skills would ever feel like they've been coached at any of our groups. It's very much having that conversation about, actually, I'd really like to be able to cook a meal all by myself, or I really feel like now I can complete that job application form, and just having small goals and working together with people to be able to achieve them. So if we move on. And these are just some of the stats that have come from that. So this particular one is about our job clubs. They do what they say on the tin. They help people who are looking for work. And we've got a great relationship with the DWP, because so many of the people who come to our job clubs have been out of work for a really long time. And actually, one of the main sessions that we have is about finding out what your skills are, and for people to realise that actually, if they're turning up to work on time, that's amazing. Sorry, to pick up the kids from school, that's amazing. And just really finding support for people through that. So just in the first 3 months of this year, up until the 31st of March, 82 people have found work, 60 paid and 22 voluntary. And although at the start you might underplay the importance of that voluntary, actually it's an amazing step for people. 266 people have been on one of our job clubs as well. If we move on. So Life Skills, the aim of Life Skills is supporting people living on a low income. So again, we want people to come somewhere where they don't feel any stigma or feeling like they're any less than, and be able to just learn from each other how to cook well on a budget, live well on a low income. There is budgeting skills in there, as well as simple tips, but it's mostly about that fact of being together and discussing things like, how do I help with my energy costs? And again, just in the first 3 months of this year, 292 people have attended one of our Life Skills. And actually it's our fastest growing of all the things that we're doing, because so many people are thinking, actually, this is what we really need right now, just to find out how we can make this work. Okay, move on. So you may well have heard of Cap Money. It's a thing that most people have come across, and it's for people who are not just in poverty. You can have, it's a face-to-face budgeting course, and so many churches, so 645 churches ran or started a Cap Money course in 2021. And it's just a kind of a supporting people to look at their income and their outgoings and think, actually, how can we make this work to try and prevent ever becoming in debt? We're just redoing our Cap Money at the moment, and we're relaunching the material there, which is really exciting. And that's going to be coming available later on this year. It's the one main one of our ministries, as I say, that's available for everybody, whereas the first ones that I spoke about really are key to and designed to support people who are on a low income. So we are called Christians Against Poverty, and often people say, well, what's faith got to do with it? It's an amazing social action work that you're doing. Why do you always do it through the local church? And for us, we do only ever partner with the local church. It's really important to us. When a client rings to get a debt help appointment, the person who they speak to will say somebody is coming from the local church and they will offer to pray for you. Would you like that? And obviously the client can say no at that time. And overwhelmingly, our clients just find it has been a massive blessing to them. They say they really felt listened, they felt understood, and they really valued that prayer. Obviously, if people do say no, they don't want prayer, that's absolutely fine and in no way impacts the advice that they're given. They are also invited to different events that the church might be doing, maybe alpha courses or barbecues or anything. And we want to be invitational, but as I say, in no way affect people if they don't want to take up that invitation. I think I did see flicking up quickly, are there any Catholic churches that you partner with? And we do partner with a few, but not that many. And one of the reasons I was so delighted to speak to you guys tonight is that we'd love to see that figure increase. So you might be listening and thinking, gosh, I'd love to get involved. And I suspect, as I say, you've already got a list going from this evening of all the different things that you can do, the ambassadors and the essential guarantee and the books and so many other things. But if you're thinking, actually, I'd like to really get involved with CAP, then there's quite a few links there that I've provided that are on our website and some different ways that you can get involved. So I'll run you through some of those. Donate, obviously. All the donations are going down, cost of living crisis, but prayer is just so important. We would love you to pray for the work that we do. On that link there is the ability to get involved in our prayer diaries and just to hear regularly about the work that we're doing and pray for us. Join the team to volunteer. Now, it may be that on the next slide you find out about the services that are in your area and you really want to get involved. And that would be great as well if you want to maybe volunteer at a local debt centre or life skills or job club, or maybe you want to help out at any of the events that we do like Spring Harvest or whatever. That's wonderful too. So campaign with us is linked to, we've got a great team in head office who do all sorts of campaigning, from things like the Poor Pay More with electricity meters and just government campaigns, maybe writing to your MPs. So there's lots of different things that you can find out without that there. And become a church partner, as Rhiannon, I think, has alluded to in the chat as well. So yeah, do have a word with your priest. If you think, actually, maybe this is something our church could get involved with, then there's, again, ways on the website that you can get in touch and we can tell you a lot more about what that means. So on the next slide, and perhaps you do know people who themselves are really struggling right now, and that link will also show you how they can get help. So for example, it's postcode based, and if I rang up and said, actually, do you know, I'm really struggling, I really need some debt help, and they'd take my postcode, and they may be able to say, yes, there's a debt centre in your area. Somebody will go out and will visit you in your home and we can get a solution together and you can become debt free. But sadly, one of the most difficult things that line has to deal with is when they say we haven't got anything in your area. And that's why we're also looking for partner churches to lower that down. But you may find that we do have a debt centre or life skills or job club, and that is how people would be able to get involved. So that is me. Thank you very much for listening, everybody.
Listening to what's been said, I have to admit, a lot of emotional response inside me. The word inspiring doesn't do it justice. But what I have seen, I've seen 3 people, Steph, Jessica, and Shan, along with their 3 organizations, who were not willing just to be observers in these problems that are all around us, but to be participants. 3 people who were not willing just to stand on the side and look, but 3 people who were willing to jump in and get involved in the mess of life, as I'm sure Jesus would have done. People who took that gospel message seriously and were prepared to act, as we say in the Catholic Church, take the option for the poor, and who are prepared to walk into those places of marginalisation. I heard words such as speak truth to power, traumas in dealing with DWP, psychological traumas. God prioritises the welfare of the poor. We heard about food banks in the 5th richest country in the world, doing with and being with, reducing the power relationship, access to churches, places where people can belong. There's a challenge for us all, places where people can belong, and walking humbly with God, not very difficult word, humble, and humility, and finding God in one another. We heard about debt help, transform lives. An awful statistic, 36% of people who come to CAP have thought about suicide. Appalling. The scourge of loneliness. None of these issues touch me, but they have come out here this evening. Creating the community, and a challenge for us Catholics who are here. But what about this low number of Catholic churches involved in CAP, in Christians Against Poverty? So I shall end here, but it does remind us, and it reminds me, that our church doors are open for us to go out, rather than us thinking that our church doors are open for other people and to come in. So why do we stand inside and wonder why nobody's coming inside our church anymore? Maybe we should just be out there. And another phrase that came out today, and I thought it was very important, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. So what are we going to do about it? Okay, thank you. And again, very special thanks to Steph and to Jessica and to Shan for those 3 wonderful talks. Much to think about. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Peter, could you show the slide? We're now going to open the floor to questions. I'm sure there is much to ask. And can I ask you to use the Zoom raised hand function? It means that you go to the front of the queue and we can get to you quite quickly. So if you could use that raised hand function, and any questions, please we'll open the floor at this stage. And of course, you're free to use the chat as well. Okay, the floor is open to everyone now.
So, Susan.
Hello. I'd just like to encourage anybody to get involved with CAP. I was involved with a wonderful church. I am a practicing Roman Catholic, but I was involved with an evangelical church up in Barrow. It's called Spring Mount, and I volunteered. I went along to the CAP courses. It was like a whole day. Although I was in Barrow, the whole day was in Liverpool, so we had a coach to Liverpool. But I would go out with the CAP assessor as a sort of, because we should go out in tours, and just saw how they worked. And then they put on wonderful, things at Christmas for people. And it was totally non-judgmental. Would offer to pray with people, and most people did accept that. So I'd say if you are interested in CAP, put the postcode in and volunteer to go along with to another church, that not a non-Catholic church, because I don't know, or if there is a Catholic one near, volunteer to go along to that. It's very, very rewarding, and they do absolutely brilliant work. So just wanted to say that. Thanks.
That's a wonderful endorsement, Susan, and you'll have seen in the chat that Sian has welcomed it, so thank you very much. Any other questions or observations? Thanks so much for that. Sian, I don't know whether you want to get back to Susan's point, but you've responded in the chat, haven't you?
I think she said everything I need to.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Brilliant. I think Jacinta, hi.
Hi, it's not a question, it was just something that really struck me from Steph. I mean, many things struck me that Steph spoke about, having been disabled in the past myself and on benefits and having to ask for money and go to tribunals and so on. I identify enormously with you. But one thing that struck me was how reliant on other people those on benefits are. Steph, sounds like you have an amazing support network in your family, but it really struck me how that could be abused by some people. You know, if you're reliant on someone, what might they try to influence in your life by offering support to you in a financial way? And also, having worked for the Medai Trust, supporting survivors of human trafficking and modern slavery, you know, this poverty is so open to abuse from traffickers and so on, who will prey on people. You know, they go to food banks and night shelters to look for people specifically to traffic them. So it's a massive issue.
A really good point. Do any of our speakers want to respond to that? That's a hugely important and thought-provoking points there, Jacinta.
Yeah, it is a really
Killing human trafficking. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just
Hi,
it's a
Steph.
really vulnerable position to be in. Like, I am very fortunate that my dad has the finances to support me and is willing to support me, and also places quite a high importance on me actually enjoying life rather than making me feel guilty about needing his help. But yeah, it's a really big problem in the benefit system that people who are in relationships, both couples have to be on the benefit. You can't just have one. You can't claim individually, and then you don't each get an individual amount of benefit. It's a combined benefit that's a lower amount than two individuals would get. And then there was something else I was going to say. The DWP's most recent white paper about disability was we help people, sick and disabled people, to be independent, but their independence basically means not claiming state supports. But actually it's claiming state support that gives me independence, because that's what gives me the freedom to live a life where I'm not dependent on whether my family have the money and the goodwill to look after me. It gives me a right to money rather than being dependent on charity and people's whims. But the government doesn't seem to care about that. They only care about whether you're dependent upon the state, and that's apparently a bad thing. But being dependent upon the whims of other people who also may not have the resources to help you, that's not a problem as far as they're concerned.
That you know, Steph, that thank you so much for that. That's things are turning in my mind. That's a really valid and important point. Thank you. I think we've got
Patricia.
Patricia, yeah. Hi.
Yeah, for some reason I don't know whether you can see you can my video.
We can see you,
although
Patricia,
you
very
you can't
clearly.
see me.
Yeah.
Okay. I just can't see myself then. Well, that's all right. It disturbs me really that there's such a rise in food banks, and you know, I think, is there any way in which we can be more proactive in our campaigning to support, to call this into question? Why have we young teachers and nurses going to food banks? Why? What? It seems that we have accepted the fact that food banks are on the rise. Even where I live, in Royal Rich Windsor, we have a food bank there. And we have homeless people. I work with the homeless group, and you know, it's an ecumenical, it's the Windsor Christian Action. But I'm more and more disturbed by the fact that I'm now seeing more homeless people rather than fewer. And I've been there for the last 6 or 7 years. And, you know, we have more coming rather than fewer coming. And I know CAP do the advocacy and campaigning as well. But I'm wondering how we at Root and Branch, or can we be supporting much more work in that area to call out the government who are now accepting the fact that you know, the welfare society the gap is being fulfilled by churches and by charities, and rather than, you know, giving people a decent living wage. And I don't know how much we as Root and Branch have supported all the strikes and all the people who are calling for a decent living wage. I just know 4 young doctors who have recently emigrated to Australia, and there are 2 more thinking of going to New Zealand because of the money, and because much more important to them, they say, is the working conditions. Now, having gone through the system of 7 years, and presumably the government training them, those 4 young doctors, one I know personally, who's only 3 years qualified. The other 3 are a bit longer. You know, that's a brain drain on the country. This is ludicrous, you know. I'm just saying that it disturbs me that we are well, we're not accepting it, but it's going on. I'm actually speaking now from Dublin, and I was asking my sister, how many food banks are there in the Republic of Ireland? Well, we have Vincent de Paul, and we have a few places where the Capuchin Franciscans and others are, but we don't have the whole the number of food banks that we have in the UK. So I'm asking myself, why is that?
You raised some really important points there. No, I was
gone on
above.
too long.
Really important
Yeah.
points. And your point about homelessness is really telling, because, you know, during lockdown, the government passed new legislation to, as they called it, sweep up all the homeless people. And then they repealed that piece of legislation when lockdown was over, the second lockdown, and people are back on the streets. And it could be any one of us. We're all, it's shocking. I don't know whether, Sian, you want to respond to Patricia's point about food bank customers. Sian, Jessica, sorry, because you were talking just now, Patricia, about doctors and nurses and teachers, weren't you?
Yes.
Jessica, I wonder whether about this sort of clientele.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing, you know, I think the nurses and the teachers is well documented, and we're seeing food banks that are having to open in the evenings and weekends. I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head. I think it's about, but it's certainly, I think it's a fifth of the increase is people working. I mean, it's absolutely a big issue, that people aren't just are not getting paid enough. And food banks are being normalised. I think whoever said that. I mean, when we're concerned, you know, a lot of churches have got involved in Warm Welcome, and obviously that's a great thing to do. But does that become the next normal thing, that you can't afford to heat your house, so you go sit in a church hall for the day? You know, and that's the way that the heating crisis is dealt with. And I absolutely not saying that, you know, I was part of looking at Warm Welcome and how we set it up. So I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing it. We've just got to be really careful that when we're doing it, we're saying, it's wrong to be doing it at the same time, because otherwise, you know, there's more and more and more that that gets left to the voluntary sector, and people are left dependent, as Steph was saying, really, but you know, dependent on charities and voluntary organisations.
Yeah, thanks. I thought, you know, the prospect of food banks and warm hubs being normalised is chilling, isn't it?
Mm.
It's really chilling. Thanks for that. I think Joyce. Hi, Joyce. Are you muted, Joyce?
Hello.
Hi.
I'm speaking from Malta now. Of course, we have many, not all the problems that were mentioned here. That's to some extent or another. But one problem that we have here, which is causing, which I'm more involved with, are the refugees who come to our shores, and many of them are brought to work at very low pay. And very often, some of them have no permit when they come, and therefore they have no rights whatsoever. And I don't know about the situation in England at the moment with them as well, but they are in such dire need. Of course, the churches help, and there are food banks like you have, and they're also encouraged to go and get some of it. But sometimes even the people are prejudiced because they are not the local people. So that is another question. That is another great poverty. And I'm not quite sure whether you have, to such an extent rather, you have this sort of, these groups, or this group of people who are also unseen, unheard, unlistened to, and very often prejudiced against. It is very difficult to work with them as well. But it is very important because they are our brothers and sisters, whatever color and nation or whatever it is. And that is also something that has to be brought to our governments and to our churches, although, as I say, I think the churches do more. Both the Catholic Church and the other churches that are here in Malta, they do more than anybody else to alleviate some of the sufferings of these people. And that's another group that, you know, perhaps we haven't mentioned this evening, but that's another group that is very much in our countries.
Thanks very much, Joyce. I don't know whether any of our speakers want to respond to your really good points about migrant and refugee poverty.
I know that a few of our life skills groups have started to work with refugees who are coming in, and also work alongside teaching English as a second language as well, just to add in all the normal stuff as part of the course, but also just an understanding of our culture and where to find things. So yeah, it just scratches the surface, though. I agree, it's just such an important issue to bring up.
Because we are right in the middle of the Mediterranean, where a lot of these people,
yeah,
you know, come in small boats from Africa. Very often they end up on our shores. Very often the governments do not want to accept them. Granted that there is the population question. We are a very tiny country, and we're already well, you know, very densely populated. It's not an excuse to say that we mustn't help them. But I think what we must really do is to make other nations aware who can help us help them, so that there won't be the tragedies and the poverty and the everything else that goes with it that they are suffering in our countries.
Thank you very much for that. And really, as it's been pointed out, Joyce, you may not have seen it yet, but pointed out in the chat how good it is that the churches where you are so proactive. Thank you for letting us know. Colleagues, can you see anybody else with a raised hand? Or if you've got a raised hand, let me know. Oh, Dorothea, hi.
Dorothea.
Hi.
Who needs to unmute?
Yeah. Thank you for all that I've heard. I was just thinking several years ago when George Osborne was Chancellor, he coined a phrase, the shirkers versus the workers. That was the narrative that was fed. And I actually was doing something at Parliament at the time, I'm not a parliamentarian, to table an early day motion, and I actually picked up on that. But the narrative we're being fed now is the othering of, for example, the migrants. And I think this is something we really do have to call out, the narrative that we are being fed by this very heartless Tory government. That's really, the point that I just wanted to make.
No, that again, that was I think Gillian might respond to that. I'm not sure. That was Gillian, you muted that. That was a very yes, I recall that too. Yeah. It was deeply shocking.
Say, it isn't just the Tory government's pernicious, but it isn't just the Tory government, it's the right-wing press. It's the press. As much as and everybody follows the press. You hear any media program, they follow what's in the newspapers. So the government is bad, but the press is also bad, and regrettably, I think the people of this country are, by and large, not of the. You'd like some of them to take a test before they voted, quite frankly, because they tend to vote that's not in. Sorry.
Yeah,
I agree, Gillian, that I think a lot of lies are told in the media, and people vote on those lies. And I'm not remember that the last general election, it was frightening. So but it's up to us to be heard. I mean, one of the greatest quotes is, "For evil to flourish, the good need do nothing."
Absolutely.
And I'm afraid that's really quite a big responsibility for us.
Isn't that right? Yeah. Isn't that right, Sue? I think, Jacinta, was your hand up? I know at the moment Libby's is up, but I don't know whether was your hand up a moment ago, Jacinta, and now down again.
No, I was clapping.
Oh, right. Yeah. And Daphne, we can see you, but I think we've got Libby first, possibly.
Oh, okay, fine.
Forgive me, I'm not sure. Right. Hi, Libby.
Hi, hello. I just want to say, I think it's really important not to underestimate the impact you can have just writing to your MP. Because I think there's a lot of work going on among MPs who detest this government as much as many of us do. I was speaking to Tim Lawton, he's the MP in the constituency next to mine, and who outraged about what Suella Braverman's doing and all of that. And he was talking about, there are many groups within the sort of MP world trying to put forward other ideas. For example, if somebody hasn't had their decision, an asylum seeker hasn't had their decision within 6 months, they should be allowed to work, because they aren't allowed to work. I work with young asylum seekers, kids who come here without their families. I've been teaching them for 20 years. I teach English to them. So they're people who have come on boats, across the channel. And yes, they're not allowed to work until there's some decision. So that needs to change, because it can go on for a long time before you get a decision. But my MP is Peter Bottomley, and I do write to him, just like a few sentences, but just to raise our voices to say how much we dislike, how much we reject the stance that the government is taking on migrants. We need to get informed, but then we've got the internet, so we can learn all about it if we want to. But I'd really recommend, especially with elections coming up and so on, that we email our MPs. Why not? And ask them what their position is and express because then if they, especially if they share our views, they have substance to put forward within the debates because their constituents, us, are speaking. That's all. Thank you.
No, that's really good. And I think actually it was Jess, you talked about APPGs, didn't you? All party parliamentary groups, and they're gold when they work properly, because that's a lot of MPs from different parties kind of converging around a single issue.
Yes, it's very
I
important.
don't know whether any of our speakers want to pick up any of Libby's points before we get on to someone had the raised hand, and then it's Julia.
Julia.
I did want to come back.
Oh, yeah, I was looking for you. Hello, Daphne. Is it Daphne?
Yes, it is.
Daphne.
Sorry, I don't have the ability to do a raise.
Don't worry, we can see you clearly.
Now, I just think that, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of MPs, including quite a few Conservatives, I would hope, who would actually love to make the system a whole lot fairer. But given that we're about, I don't know, I'm hopeless on statistics and someone is very welcome to correct me, but we're something like £14 billion in debt. And therefore, MPs have a certain responsibility to sort of try not to get us deeper into debt. But also, we spend a ridiculous amount of money on so-called security and, well, sort of safety, on the armed forces, who, I mean, we're not actually fighting a war at the moment. Okay, we're helping, thank goodness, the Ukrainians fight the war. But, if we're lobbying, I think it would be a good idea to do a lot more lobbying against spending such a large proportion of the national income on, arms and weapons and armed forces. I mean, Jesus was, known as the Prince of Peace, and he was saying, "Love your enemies." So I don't think he would approve of all our spending so much money on arms rather than on the poor. Anyway, that was just one point I wanted to make.
No, that was really interesting, Daphne. Before we get to Julia, would any of our speakers like to say something about or respond to your point, and others as well, about political engagement? Because we often feel helpless and hopeless and disenfranchised, but we're not, are we? Would any of our speakers like to respond to that point about engaging with our MPs and our ministers? People are accountable to us, in fact.
Do you want me to say something?
Yeah, please.
I mean, I think it is easy to feel helpless and hopeless, and especially, sometimes the way we vote doesn't change things if we're in particular constituencies. But I think writing to MPs is really powerful. It's particularly good to write not using a kind of campaign template, because I think when they see those coming through, they can take less notice of those. And they are obliged to write back to you, so they've got to think about the issue to at least a degree. I think the more that as well that we can find ways of acting together, of kind of being collective about things, about, we've got general election coming up, sort of hustings, asking our MPs about what they might put in a manifesto. And also as churches, we probably in our church congregations, you may well have people who are asylum seekers. You will certainly have people who are experiencing financial hardship, maybe convening ways that an MP can meet those people face to face, so that there can be direct contact. Because I do think, connection and relationship is and story really is a very good way to change people's perspective. I think the way that, we talk and what we say as well, if you're out or visiting friends or family or in a conversation, when we challenge those stereotypes and those attitudes around asylum or poverty, that's really powerful, because there's a kind of ripple effect, and we can change the narrative and change the discourse that has become very, very powerful and seems to sort of spiral into divisiveness and fragmentation. So yeah, I think there's quite a lot to do, really.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's great.
Can I just come back to Daphne, actually, because I know the Iona community well, and they have actually physically put their bodies onto Gairloch. One particular piece worker put you know, her canoe came up on Gairloch as the submarine was rising, and they got themselves imprisoned by going to South Lane. I mean, it is unbelievable the amount of money that's spent on Trident, unbelievable. And I saw a film about Trident. If it was ever used, it would be the end of the world.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, I know that we've got to be secure, but I really think there's serious money going into things that are so dangerous. So I'd like to sort of second Daphne on that, and I don't know how what we can do, but certainly the Iona community do a lot. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thanks. I know time is marching on, but I just wanted, Steph, sorry to put you on the spot, whether you had a response to the point about political engagement, you know, in the area that you're working in.
I think so. What Jessica said about writing your own letter is really important, because the same letter repeatedly. It does feel like it sometimes isn't worth it, but I think because they are required to respond, then at least something's going in, and because they're required to represent their constituents, if they get a lot of letters on a particular issue, it does affect what they will then do as an MP, and you don't want them to hear more from the other side. You don't want the MPs to be hearing more from people who are thinking that too much is spent on benefits. For example, you want them to be hearing that not enough is being spent on benefits, and that for that to be the main story.
Yeah, that's a really important point about flipping it, isn't it, Steph? Thanks so much. We have run out of time, except that Julia has had her hand up for, I think, quite a long time. Julia.
Sorry, yeah, I did take it down thinking we were finishing.
I would want to hear from you. We'll have to finish at this point.
It was basically about being in touch with your local MP, get a relationship going so that you can write Dear Hugh, whoever he's called. It does have a big impact. Kind of maybe build it into your prayer week. I think my prayer week's not been complete if I haven't done at least 3 emails to my MP on something. You get very, very good briefings from a lot of our organizations, and don't be frightened if you think your briefing's not good enough. Ask the idiot question. Sometimes asking the idiot question to your MP will get them thinking and moving a lot more than you trying to convince them that you're fully briefed, you know. So put it in your prayer plan, maybe. Keep really on my MP.
So really valuable and really practical. Thank you so much. I'm really sorry we've come to the end of our discussion time, but I've got no doubt that this has got legs. It's going to run and run, and we'll be back here without a shadow of a doubt. So I'm going to hand over. Thanks so much to our speakers. Clearly, thanks so much to all of you for participating. So, you know, the time-honoured fashion of Root and Branch, such lively discussion and interesting questions. And I think now it's over to Kevin, who's going to introduce a future event.
Hello again, everyone. Yeah, I want to talk about a future Root and Branch event. It's called Stolen Lives. I want to ask you, the Bishops of England and Wales every year have designated a special day. It's a Tuesday on the 5th week of Easter. Tuesday on the 5th week of Easter. I'm not sure if any of you have heard what that day is, but it has been designated especially by the Bishops of England and Wales. That date is a day of prayer for victims of clerical sexual abuse. Unfortunately, it does tend to be rather ignored, and not much happens on that day. But Root and Branch is not letting that day go. So we're having an event, not on the exact day, but on Wednesday, the 17th of May at 8 p.m. It will be the third event called Stolen Lives. I think the title says it all, Stolen Lives. Now, this time it's a bit different. We will be launching a new publication. It's called It's Our Church and It's Up to Us. Now, this new publication is full of very practical things that everyone can do to take action against clerical abuse, and how it has to stop and how it can't be covered up anymore. So we're often stuck in a situation of, well, what can I do? Or even worse, well, it's all been dealt with and now we can move on. Well, it hasn't been dealt with, and we can't move on unless we really face up to it. So please join us on Wednesday, the 17th of May at 8 p.m. and you can find out what we can practically do about this horrifying abuse in the Catholic Church. Okay, and back to you, Rhiannon.
Thanks. Thank you. No, thank you. All are welcome. Over to Maggie, in fact.
I just want to say, first of all, what an amazingly rich evening this has been. The discussion is so powerful. Most of the group will know that we are sort of almost 2/3 of the way through a universal synod on synodality within the Roman Catholic Church. And I just really want to very quickly say, for the benefit of our guests that may not be familiar with this, that the findings from this so far have indicated that there is so much othering that the faithful have identified within our Roman Catholic groups of people, the marginalizing of groups. And when one thinks it was only in, I think, 1983, or up until 1983, that having a disability was a bar to ordination. So disabled people are certainly one of those groups that are marginalized. And that came out in the findings of the reports that were part of our synodal process. So I just wanted to bring that out there. But what I really wanted to say, that Spirit Unbounded is a root and branch led initiative. It is a platform whereby we wish to offer the opportunity for Roman Catholic reform groups, ecumenical groups, people of faith who want to be a different church, who want to have a different experience of church, to meet and to share. It's for people who are interested in finding a church that is, or making a church, being a church that is inclusive, kind, truthful, and just. And we're not finding that that is our experience. So Spirit Unbounded is our way of giving us voice. So what we are doing is we are holding an event, a hybrid event, and this is a date for your diary, on the 13th and 14th of October in 2023. It will be held in Bristol in the UK and in Rome, but also globally. And from the 8th to the 12th of October, there will be digital online content only. And this is called the Discipleship of Equals. It will be a hybrid in-person virtual event. It's a lay-led response to the Synod. We are program planning now. We have got a stellar lineup of speakers, and we're still adding to the program. We already have former President of Ireland, two-term President of Ireland, Dr. Mary McAleese, and we've also got the theologian, Sister Joan Chichester, a titan on the stage of theological reform. We have got our ecumenical base in Bristol, where our IT team are based, and they managed an event like this for us previously in September 21 to great acclaim. So what I would urge you to do is just visit our website, go to spiritunbounded.org. You can contact us for more information at the following email, hello@spiritunbounded.org. And some of the reform groups, ecumenical groups that have joined us already, who we term companions on the road, are going to appear in just a moment. And it's working with this group together that we realize there's a real clamor for change. And this is change from the grassroots. We have a lot more power than we know. Thank you very much.
Going to ask for any volunteers from the audience to read this beautiful non-traditional blessing from Sister Ruth Fox, or perhaps two of you split it in two. Gillian, your hand's up. Lovely. You're muted though. Lovely.
It would help.
Thank you. We don't know. Would anyone like to read it? Anyone else? Okay, Gillian, all yours. Thank you.
May God bless you with discontent, with easy answers, half-truths, superficial relationships, so that you will live from deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, abuse, and exploitation of people, so that you will work for justice, equality, and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that you will reach out your hand to comfort them and to change their pain to joy. May God bless you with the foolishness to think you can make a difference in this world, so that you will do the things which others tell you cannot be done. You can do it.
It was beautifully read, Gillian, with real feeling.
I really
brought that blessing alive. Thank you. We'll be asking you from here on in to read it with us, for us. Thank you so much. Thank you. Anyone, any of my colleagues, any final words? Obviously, a huge thanks to our speakers, and a huge thanks to all of you for coming and being so lively in the chat and so lively in the discussion and so curious, and for sharing. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful evening. But watch this space. This is, as you've been intimating here in the discussion, this is a topic, a massive area that clearly is not going to go away, and we're going to continue to engage with it in Root and Branch. So bring your ideas to us, and we'll see you again. Thanks so much.
And a particular thank you to Rhiannon for organising it, because it's been an amazing evening, and especially
Well,
to
I couldn't have done it without my colleagues, Sue.
Well, I know that, but the point is that to hear what the other churches are doing, I think we have to get the Catholic Church into gear.
We have to get a move on,
about
folks.
time. Yeah. Thank
We
you.
know that,
Yeah.
We need to persuade others.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Have a very good night.